good afternoon, everyone. It's a privilege to lead this session at Icon 10-year anniversary. Congrats again. My name is Oren. I'm a managing partner at Notable Capital, formerly known as GGV Capital. We're a global early-stage venture capital firm with a focus on cloud infrastructure. So a lot of familiar faces. It is my honor to host a visionary leader whose work has a profound impact on the way we experience the internet today. As president, co-founder, and COO of Cloudflare, Michelle Zatlyn has been at the forefront of shaping the internet security and performance on a global scale. Under her leadership, Cloudflare has evolved into a critical player in the digital landscape, protecting and accelerating millions of websites. Today, Michelle will be sharing her insights and strategies, lessons drawn from her extensive experience in building and leading one of the most influential companies in the tech industry. Please join me in welcoming Michelle Zatlyn.
Thank you. Hi.
Okay, Michelle, thanks for joining us today. And just for everybody's benefit, when I asked Michelle to join us, she immediately said yes. So many here are familiar with Cloudflare, but not necessarily grasp how amazing of a business you built. Can you share some stats with the audience?
Sure. So part of the reason why I said yes so quickly is that I used to come to a lot of events like this when I was an early stage founder, and I got a lot out of learning from those who had walked the road ahead of me. And so I always like to pay it forward and give it back, because I used to be a very eager founder, and I was invited to a lot of cool events. I would go to a lot of cool events, and I learned a lot from people in front of me. So I started Cloudflare, we're coming up on 14 years old, with 2 founders. So some of you have co-founders. I started with 2 co-founders, 3 of us. And we're about to turn 14 at the end of September. So we're 14 years old. In that time, we started from nothing. Now, this year, we're on track to about $1.6 billion in revenue, which is. I think many of you, if you were a founder, would be happy if you had $1.6 billion in revenue in about a decade. That's a good run rate up and to the right. We have about 4,000 people around the world. So just to kind of give you a sense, so from nothing to 4,000 people. That's been my journey. Happy to help do that. What Cloudflare does is, it's interesting. If I'd met you 10 years ago, I would have had a hard time describing what Cloudflare was. Some of you I did meet 10 years ago, I had a hard time describing it. Now we say Cloudflare is the world's leading connectivity cloud. We can talk about what that means. And our mission is to help build a better internet. And so we work with businesses, both startups up into the Fortune 100, we really do, help make sure that their employees, their applications, and their networks are both fast and secure while reducing complexity and cost. Super important in today's very complex and costly world. And so that's what really Cloudflare is delivering. And so security is one of the things that we care a lot about. Yesterday, we helped stop 187 billion cyber attacks on behalf of all of our customers, which is pretty powerful. And again, pretty cool that we were able to build that in less than 15 years. And so it's amazing when you can take an idea that you see as a founder and then really make it come to life. And I guess that's what I've been able to do the last 14 years.
That's an incredible journey. A lot of people talk about their journey from 0 to 1. That's 0 to 1.6 billion is no small feat. Congrats.
Thank you.
So what are your responsibilities as president and COO at Cloudflare? How did they grow with time?
Sure. Okay. So here's the thing. I do these things because I want to be helpful to all of you. It's not really about what Cloudflare's doing. It's more about what did I learn that maybe could help save you some heartache or gray hair along the way. And so it's interesting when I think about the journey from 0 to 1.6 billion in revenue. There are different natural stages. There's kind of like the first 20 people that were at Cloudflare trying to get that first revenue, the product market fit piece. And then it was kind of, okay, once we had that, getting to 100 million was its own stage. 100 million to a billion was its own stage. And now I'm in a new stage. And it's been an inflection point to go from 1 billion plus. Now I frame it as 1 to 5. And we're early in that journey, but well on our path. And each part of that has been different. And so today I'm our president and chief operating officer. Today I run all the go-to-market organizations. So we have a sales team, we have a marketing team, we have partnerships. All of that reports up into me on the go-to-market side, plus our people and places organization. And it's actually really fitting because the 2 best parts of my job are the people I get to work with and our customers. So it's great that those are part of my roles and responsibilities on a daily basis. If you zoom back to like when we were a $100 million business or before that, that was not my job. My title was not president and chief operating officer. It was one of those things where I kind of earned it and grew into it over time. And so I think that's interesting. And I remember early at Cloudflare, we were just getting started. We were first-time founders. We showed up in Silicon Valley, and the promise of the Valley really paid dividends to us, where venture capitalists gave us some money to go prove it, but we were unproven people. I was just kind of a regular person. No one knew, we didn't have a reputation here, let's put it that, or a track record. And I remember we went to the first board meeting, and we took capital at the time from Venrock. They were a big cybersecurity investor at the time. And I remember we were really excited. This was back in 2010, okay? I was so excited. We were about to hire somebody who was coming from Facebook. And at Facebook, he was a senior director, and so VP was super important title for him. And I remember on this slide, we went to the board meeting, we were saying, great news, we're about to hire a VP of production engineering. And thinking that, like, technical operations, and thinking this was gonna be a no-brainer, because it was like, he had great pedigree, he was Yahoo and Facebook, and back in 2010, that was a big deal. And I remember our board member being like, whoa, you're giving him the VP title? How many people has that person hired? How many people has he fired? Why are you giving him a VP title? If it doesn't work out, how are you gonna hire above him? And it was so interesting. I remember driving back home. We were down at Sand Hill Road. We didn't have an office at the time, so we were meeting at Venrock's office. We drove home from this, our office wasn't very nice at the time, so we went to their offices, I should say. We were driving back to the city. I remember saying, okay, we are gonna have a very flat work, because we have to prove ourselves a lot. We have to show. And so for a long time, the first kind of 5 years of Cloudflare, my business partner, Matthew, he was our CEO. You need one CEO. But like, I was just user experience. And Lee, my other co-founder, was lead engineer. And that was it. And we kind of didn't have titles for a long time because it was clear we had to prove ourselves. And I think that it's interesting as I've kind of scaled, and now when we go sell to United, I mean, you want a big title to go match the CTO of United. You want that to match. But when you're getting started, sometimes you have some time to figure that out. So that was kind of a lesson learned, that it was interesting that kind of being like, fine, I just won't take a big title early on, set the tone that anytime we went to talk to the next person we were trying to hire, we're like, we don't really do titles here. And because Lee and I were playing along with not big titles, everyone else kind of got along line too. And so those are a little bit stories about kind of what my roles and responsibilities have been over the time.
Everybody's a founding member.
Everyone's a founder. Well, you know, it's interesting. I needed some title, and I didn't want product and marketing, and so I was like, I need something better. And back in 2010, this is, you know, the cycle of tech, Marissa Myers was doing great. She was at Google, and she was head of user experience, and she was like all over all the magazine covers and everything back in 2010, and I thought, wow, if it's good enough for Marissa Myers and Google, it's good enough for me.
Okay, that's amazing journey.
This is how you kind of make it up, right? You kind of make it up as you go along.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to take us back to the company and zoom out a little bit. So you're building the backbone of the internet. Does that mean that you're a server company or you're a cloud company? Which one is it?
So the opportunity we have seen, and now it's become much more prevalent today, is that, and again, it wasn't so prevalent when we started, was we were shifting from a world of hardware. If you think about the first generation internet's 30 years old. The first generation was held together by server rooms in organizations and like racks and racks of hardware, and that really made the internet run the first inning. But with the rise of cloud computing, there's been something else. And we really saw this big shift of businesses buying hardware and software to make their businesses run, to saying, oh wait, these are gonna move into a service. And back in the day, for cloud compute, like for store compute, AWS was really early, but back when we started, it was like, is that a fad? Obviously, it turned out not to be a fad, but back then, that was the debates. Like back then, it was not clear. And so it's like, well, if workloads are moving to the cloud, and then on the software layer, there's been this huge proliferation of SaaS-based businesses, you know, before you bought Oracle, SAP, Microsoft, but you could see Workday and Salesforce coming up. If you were gonna do applications and store compute in the cloud, like as a service, the network would have to move to the cloud too. And that was like, and before you bought hardware gear, like Cisco, I mean, there's lots of folks here who worked at those companies, like all the hardware used to do to make these businesses run. And the idea was, could Cloudflare build an integrated platform that did all these things that hardware did? So that was like one aha. The second aha was, before the cloud, you would buy very specialized hard boxes, because if you stack them on premise, interconnecting them all is really quick. So you could have a Riverbed box and a Cisco box interconnect, and there's no latency when you're running it on-prem. But if you shift it to the cloud, there's lots of latency. And so that was the second kind of aha that we had back in the day. And so we said we have to build a global network that can basically do all these things these kind of point boxes could do as one integrated platform. And this platform is going to do a lot for customers. You plug into the platform will do a lot. And it was interesting when we used to talk about this early on, there's a lot of people who said, I have no idea what you're talking about. Like they literally would look the other way, which is fine. There are other people who thought we were crazy because that sounded crazy, right? It's like you're going to get crushed by Imperva, you're going to get crushed by Akamai, you're going to get crushed by Riverbed, you're going to get crushed by all these companies doing this already. And then there were some people who said, I totally get it. I have no idea if you'll be successful, but if you are successful, that's going to be worth a lot of money. Like you're going to build something really like big and making an impact. And it was interesting. The more time I spent with people in that third camp, the more motivating it was for me as a founder, because you don't sound like a crazy person. You find people who reinforce your idea, who can help attract the talent to go do the stuff, versus the more people we spent in the middle of saying that will never work, that actually kind of becomes a chip on your shoulder, like I will prove you wrong. I think that can be a motivator. And then the people in the first camp, I just read up about other interests and talked to them about that, not my own business, because it was almost became demotivating. And so I think that was really interesting that as founders, we see things that not everyone around you sees, and you have to really try and match what you see with the people around you in order to make progress. And I think that that's been pretty amazing. We started by doing a lot of CDN, WAF, DDoS, kind of protecting web applications, APIs, and that's where we started. And even when I remember we launched our WAF, people said, that's impossible, you're gonna get killed by Imperva. They've been doing it for 10 years. So it's interesting that, and today we're top right in the Magic Garden, and I think people are much happier to own our stock than theirs and whatnot. But it's just been interesting to see if we had listened to what people had said along the way, gosh, we definitely would not have reached our full potential. You have to go against the grain while also taking input along the way. In 2016, we said we're going to get into then we said we're going to get into zero trust. And just like all of your businesses, we have 1,000 things to do and enough people to do 100 of them. That means 900 important things aren't getting done. Like just every growth company has way more things than people or time could do. And so adding into a new product category obviously means more work, new things, new competing priorities. And I remember we were talking about this as a leadership team, and we had made a big noise that we were going into this. And one of our execs came into our management meeting on the Monday morning and was like, oh, I was at a party this weekend down in Palo Alto. And they said, oh yeah, Cloudflare, you guys are a mile wide and an inch deep. And it was interesting, we looked, was like, was that a compliment or a slight? And he's like, I think it was a slight. Meaning like, you guys are all over the place, like no one understands. And now fast forward to today, the fact that you can be a platform that you can get both zero trust and your CDN and WAF and DDoS from, as well as, oh, by the way, we do networking, and oh, by the way, you can make it totally programmable, that's what people are buying and spending a lot of money on. But like 5 years ago, people didn't see it. We had to show them that it was possible and really pave the way. And we still have a lot of work to do, we're not done, but it's just been kind of a reminder as a founder, you gotta keep retelling the story and having conviction around what you're doing and then prove it along the way.
Love it. You need to be crazy enough, and you need to have enough crazy people around you to tell you that you need to keep pushing.
I guess so, but don't lose. Actually, it's interesting the crazy comment, which is kind of a double-edged word. Is having said that, the day before we filed to go public, which happened 5 years ago, we went public. It'll be 5 years that we went IPO in a couple weeks, and. Thank you. Super fun the day that we rang the bell at the New York Stock Exchange. I remember that day saying, like, let's do it again. I'm starting another company, then I'm going to go public. I don't know if I'm going to do that, but anyhow, it was in the moment. It sounded like a great idea. It was just super fun and proud, all kind of accumulating together. But it was interesting. For some of you who haven't gone through the IPO process yet, I hope all of you get to go through. The ones that want that, I wish it for all of you. Is you're working on this confidentially for a long time, and there's all these security rules of why you want it to be confidential, and then like one day it just becomes public where you're now selling shares for your business, and you're pretty coordinated around it. So the day before the news that we had filed to go public, which was a day we knew was coming, and we were like counting it down, the day before WeWork filed to go public. And it was super interesting, and they were riding really high. They were talking crazy founder, big visionary, painting a huge vision. And I think that's maybe a little bit of a story that we could all learn from of, yeah, you want to paint a big picture and believe in what you're doing, but you don't want to lose touch with reality, because there's two ways to crash a plane. One is go straight down into the ground, very obvious one. The other one is if you go straight up into the air, you also stall and crash back down into the ground. And so I think that you need to believe, you have to believe, Ted Lasso, believe, but you have to also be grounded in some reality. And I think that actually is a really hard, sometimes it's hard, especially when things are going well. You're growing faster than ever. I remember it was during COVID, our revenue was growing faster than ever. We had record people applying to work at Cloudflare, we're winning. Every quarter you're like growing faster, you're like, this is awesome. It's easy to think that you're infallible, but like, gosh, then the macroeconomic correction came and you realize, oh, it had nothing to do with us. We just happened to have the right product, the right moment, and really we were kind of taking orders and we weren't so talented. And so, I think we have to keep ourselves grounded too.
Crazy and grounded. Okay, so you're $1.6 billion in revenue business today. As you move from startup to being a platform, how did you define who's going to be a friend or a partner and who's going to be a foe or a competitor?
Yeah, it's so interesting. Our mission at Cloudflare is to help build a better internet. And it was interesting, the first iteration of that, like back in 2011, was like build a better internet. That was our mission. Sounds pretty good, ringy, kind of pithy, punchy, build a better internet. Again, we are like 40 people and we're saying this is our mission. We like had no revenue. I mean, we had, I don't know, $100,000 in revenue. We like, or whatever it was. It was not a lot, let's put it that way. And so we're talking about what our mission is. And I remember it was Brad Burnham, who was at Union Square Ventures at the time. I guess it wasn't that early, a little bit later. Maybe we were more 50 million in revenue. We were like, oh, we finally kind of memorialized our mission. It was to help build a better internet. I remember him saying, or to build a better internet, excuse me. He's like, I don't like build a better internet. And we were like, what? How can you not like that? It's like, we were like so like bled that. We were like we had fallen in love with this idea. He's like, because the internet's a collection of companies. It's an ecosystem. And so we really took that and like, I just remember that moment. We're like, okay, what about help build a better internet? He's like, I like that. And it was actually really good input of like, I don't like that. It comes across as like too cocky, arrogant. We thought it was like a can do. And so the help matters a lot. So I use help, your question about who's a friend, who's a foe, because I think of this ethos of it's an ecosystem, and actually many of you in this room, like we should be partners, we should do things together, we should be helping, and I think that's actually the spirit of tech. Like even SaaS-based business leaders, like we kind of all our vintage, like all of us who are kind of over, 500 million in revenue up, we kind of all know each other, kind of get together regularly, and it's interesting. People help each other because there's kind of friends. It's like, okay, how do you scale? Like scaling your company is a lot of hard work, and you don't want to make mistakes, and you want to find, you want to hear from others how they thought about, letting somebody go or doing this, like all of the issues that we have running a business. And so this help build, so back to friends. So we actually have a lot of friends where we've always said, hey, we want to be a good actor in the ecosystem. We care. We want to partner with a lot of people. And so we have thousands of partners. We've created some alliances, something called the Bandwidth Alliance, to say, hey, let's bring people together. So we waive egress fees, so it's better for the end customer. So the way we think about somebody is like, can we do something together to make it better for the end customer? So like a 1 + 1 = 3. If you can like CrowdStrike on us, we're partners. We don't compete, but we partner, and we have done a technical integration that makes it better for the end customer than if they had to buy each of it directly. That's good. We think we're adding value to the world. And so we love these businesses where we can either learn from each other. We share similar, we care about privacy. Apple cares a lot about privacy, so do we. We don't compete at all, but it's a message, a narrative that we all believe in. How can we work together to help further that? And then where can we partner to make it 1 + 1 = 3? I think we have thousands and thousands of friends. The competitor piece is interesting. I think a good litmus test is imagine all the dollars in the world are accounted for. And if your customer is making a decision, are they spending it on you or this other person? That's a competitor. Now, competitors aren't necessarily foe. They actually make you better. But that is a competitor where it's like they're going to make a choice. It's either us or them. And it's interesting where in those cases, it's like, okay, or or a foe is someone who's actually trying to undermine what you're doing. And sadly, that also happens sometimes in business, especially for high growth companies, because often you see the world in a different way and you're trying to rewrite how it looks. There's somebody that is getting the pain of that and they don't like it. And so there's some mud that's thrown. And so that's how I've thought about it. And it's not always like a revenue share deal. I think there's lots of ways to be friends, and then on the foe side, it's like, okay, we've always said, how do we be a classy competitor? I wasn't really one that, I'm not really a person who likes to take low punches. It was kind of like, how do we be classy? But almost like you almost admire how good your competitor is because they're so classy and like almost hand-to-hand combat versus low punches. And so that's kind of on the second piece, how we think about it.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
It's super helpful.
Oh, awesome.
I hope it's helpful to the audience. Yeah. But speaking about partnering, you have a corp dev arm today, and Cloudflare makes acquisitions. How are you thinking about partnering versus buying a startup, and what would you advise a startup founder?
Okay, so I'm learning a lot about this. We've actually done 7 acquisitions up through like $1 billion in revenue. They've been small, and we've done it to complement our tech roadmap. We are a very technical company. We do a lot of organic development. We want a very seamless integration. And so we have had a track record of buying technical talent early to help complement, our product roadmap. And actually, I think in that case, we've had some really great DNA and talent come into the business and help us further, whatever we need to do, and that's been great. And so that's been kind of up until this point. But it's interesting, and I'm learning from others back to, I do this because I learn from I've learned a lot from those ahead of me, and I hope that this is helpful to some of you. And so recently, if you just look, first of all, it's really hard to get to $1 billion in revenue. The numbers are kind of, again, first of all, if you get to 100 million, that's already a big accomplishment. 100 to $1 billion is another leg of the journey that is rare. It happens, it feels like it happens all the time because we're in tech, but it's really actually very hard to do, okay? So if you're anywhere near either of those paths, you're already way in the top quartile of companies. Or if you have aspirations, go for it, because that you would be in the top quartile of companies. It's again, very rare. But going from 1 to 5 is really, really rare. And by the way, 5 to 10, really rare. And over 10, I think there's 6 software companies that have gotten past 10 billion in revenue. That's it, 6. It's not very many. So you're just okay. You're okay, why do we think we can do it? But I do. We're not anywhere. We're not there yet. But we're swinging for that fence. And so it's interesting that M&A early on for us was really more to further our roadmap, the tech, the DNA, and that's worked well. But if you just look at other companies ahead of us that are the 1 to 5, 1 to 10 who have done it, M&A almost always plays an important role to help continue to accelerate revenue. And part of it is because what happens is if you're getting to 100 million, that means you have really good product market fit. And often if you get to it, then it's okay, how do you go to 100 million to $1 billion? And it's you're really executing well, getting that into the market. Most act ones that get you there won't get you to 2 to 5. You just run out of market space. You have to figure out something next to sell. Otherwise, you just run out of you run out of the fuel you need to sell. I know it sounds silly, but it's kind of if you just look at the data, student of the data, that's what it looks like. And so a lot of companies from 1 to 5, they do acquisitions to help complement, to buy the revenue so they can keep growing, okay? So revenue M&A becomes much more important in this next stage. Now, I'm new to this stage, so I'm just learning. So I've learned from those ahead of me, and it's interesting. What I've learned is if you're gonna start to do acquisitions at scale for revenue, you have to have your go-to-market team humming. You have to have your go-to-market engine humming, otherwise it's a disaster. And so I think that's been something that I'm hoping at some point I put that into practice, and I can come back and report back whether it worked or not, but that's kind of the thesis. And so I think that's how we think about it at Cloudflare is, at first we were pretty organic. We've done it for the tech. This next stage, we probably will do it for the revenue. Revenue will be more interesting to us. That means bigger price tags and all those sorts of other things that come along with that complexity. But your go-to-market team has to be able to absorb it so that you can go and make it a success. And I think some of those ahead of us have done that well. And so, again, we're learning from those ahead of us.
Super interesting. I think a lot of the founders here don't when you say 1 to 5, they think about 1 to 5 in ARR.
Yes, you're right.
But,
so early again. But if you get to 1 to 5, then you can go. If you get to 5, you can get to 100.
And just to make clarification here, getting to $1 billion in revenue is not top quartile. It's probably 1% of 1%. So.
Okay. Well, I'm a tough grader, but yes, well said.
But that's awesome. Okay, I want to switch gears to some trendy topics. We haven't touched Gen AI, which is crazy if we're at this point.
It's more than 7 minutes, so yeah, every 7 minutes it changes.
Exactly.
We talk about it every 7 minutes, yeah.
I'm curious, how are you thinking about Gen AI as it regards to your SWOT? Like your weaknesses, will you get disrupted now, this Gen AI? And perhaps some of the strength, because you have the distributions, you have the data. How is that affecting Cloudflare in your mind?
Okay, so I think my founder hat on, the first question you have to ask is AI a tailwind or a headwind to your business? You have to be honest. It's a little bit like, are you building this to get acquired? Are you building it to stay independent? Like the more honest you are with yourself, the better your chances of better outcomes. And so with AI, it's Gen AI, is it a tailwind or a headwind for your business? For us, it's a tailwind. So I feel strongly. So when the first, when this was coming up in our board asked, when they were like, we want an AI briefing, like TLDR, this is a tailwind for our business. Oh, all of a sudden everyone sleeps better, like that, and then we can go into a deep dive as to why, but like you just have to be confident, is it a tailwind or a headwind? For us, it's a tailwind. And so for us, AI, I would think about it in 3 ways. So the first is, when you think about, like if I go back to the original business plan, I don't have it, I should have brought a copy. Like I was literally a business school student when we wrote a business plan for Cloudflare. It was a school project that turned into this idea. Cloudflare, the whole premise was, if we crowdsource the cybersecurity, at the time, each company secured itself, but there was no collective learning. Because in a hard world, there was no way to be collective learning. So every company kind of secured itself, and they might be learning among like the financial services industry, but the technology wasn't orchestrating it. One of our theses at Cloudflare was, the company with the best data will build the best cybersecurity services because you use machine learning and AI to do all the analysis. And so that was like why we want to do it. We want to build a service that lots of companies use, both big and small, crowdsource all the data, and then you'll know who's good, who's bad, in a really much more real time. And so while we have not used Gen AI in our pitches over the years, but that's kind of been the ethos of what we are. And so like for that, it's like, great, let's make sure we're using the latest models and all the best to continue the learning on the cybersecurity side. And so that's been really, really like, makes what we already were doing better. So that's like back to why I'm saying tailwind for sure. At the same time, businesses care about privacy and their data leaking. Well, guess what? Cloudflare is a service that helps protect, make things more private. We speed things up. Like we should be also helping organizations be able to take advantage of AI with like firewalls to make sure that none of the data leaks. So it's just an extension of what we're already doing in the market. So like that's kind of on that pillar. So we're using it to make our products better that we sell to customers, tailwind. The second place every single company in the world is thinking about it is how do you use AI internally to make your teams more productive? How do you use it so your support teams are more productive or your marketing teams are more productive? Because everyone is under pressure to take costs out of their business. And so you're being asked to do more with less. So it's how are you using it internally to run these teams most efficiently? In that, we don't want to be top 1% or 10%. It's too much work to be top 10% of that. It's like not worth it. Do you want to be bottom 10%? Absolutely not. But if you're in the top third of companies of how you're doing that internally, that means you're more productive than someone else. You'll recap that. You can recoup those dollars and invest them somewhere else. So that's how we think about using AI to make run our business more efficiently. Again, we kind of want to be top half, top third, okay? As things get proven out, of course you want to make sure you're like really fully leveraging it, but there's lots of learnings left to do. The third category, which I think is super interesting, and the one that, to this audience, I will talk up a big game, but to my shareholders, I really try not to, because you can really, back to overpromise and underdeliver, is we run this global network that's doing all the security, privacy, performance sort of things. We let people run code out there too. We have a whole kind of serverless compute platform. There, our set of competitors is different than on the zero trust side, and the amounts are really big, okay? But it's early days in serverless computing. There's still some hard computer science problems left to be solved. But what's interesting is we deploy GPUs at the edge of our network. We're in 100 countries, 350 cities around the world, where we're running GPU compute at the edge. And so all of a sudden if you want to build the next AI product, you need somewhere to do inference. And you're not going to do it on the server side where you're doing running the big models. And the best is on the end device, like the phone or the laptop, but there's some things that are probably bigger than they need. You need a third place to run inference, and at the edge of the network probably is the place to do it. And Cloudflare's Connectivity Cloud is, that we believe, the right place to do it. So we got the GPUs, we deployed them around the world, and so now we're partnering with organizations to say, okay, go build something with this. And it's super cool, because now we're helping companies be more innovative to build these AI-enabled services that will hopefully make, you know, our lives and businesses better. And so that's kind of the third arm of where it's an interesting opportunity. And like, that's really big if that works out. It's still early innings, but we're watching all three.
That's super cool. I didn't know that trend, and should listen more to the shareholder letters when they come.
You've got a lot on your plate, Oren. It's not, yes.
So Cloudflare is sitting in such an important junction of the internet. I think we talked about it. You touch 20% of the internet today.
Yeah, of the web.
How do you know, and I'm sure you watch closely as the CrowdStrike event happened. How are you thinking about that with regards to Cloudflare? How do you make sure your business is resilient for something like that?
Well, I was talking to Mark Gaffon, who runs IONX Next outside, and you know, so the internet never sleeps. It's 24/7, 365 days a year. Like, it just never sleeps. And so the 20% of the web stat, which is true, it's like every second, it's almost 100 million requests per second touch our network that we're making faster, safer, better. Huge responsibility, huge privilege, right? It's both. It's like, this is why people are so excited, and I get to do all the awesome things, but gosh, like, it's humbling, and you think, gosh, you got to take that really seriously, because a lot of people are depending on us.
Right.
And so it's interesting, and you know, when I had 5 million AR, it just wasn't a top of mind. You're just trying to get it to work, right? And so these are things that success, if you're successful, you have to really start to care a lot about. And so as an industry, I do think that in this world where we're more services, it is a responsibility if you run a service to take it seriously. And I think like come back to kind of like good governance, good financial hygiene. I think it's like just becomes a leadership quality, and it's something that like Matthew and I and our leadership team care a lot about, and we believe it. So that's helpful. It's not outsourced to some one team. And it's the same with security, frankly. It's like, that's not outsourced to our security team. We have a security team, they're amazing, but it's something that we all take responsibility for as a leader. We care about it. And when you care about it, then it's easy to make it better. And so this idea of resilience is becoming really more important as I talk to businesses. And the CrowdStrike situation has only exacerbated that, where I was with one customer recently, and they weren't even a CrowdStrike customer, but they're like, that can never happen at my company. And I think, well, that can never happen is not quite realistic, but they're like, and so we're implementing all these new processes that we're going to demand on our vendors and partners to meet. So I'm just letting you know that we're going to ask a lot more of you. And I said, okay, well, no problem. We've been doing this since day one, and it's baked into our DNA. But they don't even know what they're asking for is why. But it's interesting. They're like, we just can't let that happen to us. And so I do think it's a little bit of a crystallizing moment of how, as an industry, do we shape the narrative, what language, what does this mean? And there isn't an answer yet. And so it's interesting of like the companies who are stepping in to say, let us help shape the conversation of resiliency. What does this mean? How should you think about this internally at your organization? Because going back to a hardware world is not going to make it better. But that's the risk, that people say, I'm just not going to use services. I'm just going to go back to hardware because I can run it with my teams. And so it's been interesting to see what this means in the industry. And again, I think we are going to rise to the occasion, because we have to do that, because right. We are a 24/7, 365-day a year service. But one thing I keep pushing our team is like, we should be helping shape the narrative, and we got to step into it. And what's interesting is people look around, they're like, well, I don't know what to say. But I'm like, no one knows what to say. So let's just start with something and get feedback and iterate off of it. And I think it's almost like that founder mindset. Like, I'm still a founder, although I'm executive, a publicly traded company. But it's like my founder muscles are coming in really handy right now, saying like, just start with something. Like, let's start with this. How does this sound? No, I don't like that. Okay, what about this, that? And you start to iterate, and you're like, okay, now that's a straw man that we can start with. Might be imperfect, but at least we've started, versus just looking around the room saying, I'm waiting for someone else to come up with the words, which has been kind of interesting to see. So I do think it's critically important. The last thing I'll just say about the CrowdStrike thing was interesting. I personally was watching TV I turned on the TV that day because I wanted to see what all the talk show hosts were saying, because it was such a current affairs for everyone, of like the language they were using. I thought it was interesting what the mainstream media, because they were also kind of unprepared. it was kind of one of these moments of like, how do I even talk about this? And so again, I think we're going to look back of like, that was an interesting moment where some things shifted.
Well, personally, I was watching this very closely at the Newark airport trying to get into the country, but that's a different story.
Yes, yes. We're happy they let you in.
Yes,
yes,
eventually.
yeah.
Let's talk for a second about the election.
Okay.
What are some internet patterns you're seeing versus, perhaps prior elections?
Sure. Well, so about half of the world is going to vote this year, 49% of people, which is like a lot.
Election year.
Yeah, and like around the world, there's just a lot of elections being held, and if you kind of add up all the population, it's 49%. So lots of elections being held. And so we've been quite concerned about election security. What's interesting is cybersecurity is one of the things we do at Cloudflare, but I don't do a lot. We don't speak a lot in like fear, uncertainty, and doubt. We kind of are more about like we can help secure things and more positive. But it's interesting around election security. We were very concerned because we had seen in prior elections just some of the damage that can be caused. So we've been really nervous about it. We've been heightened, and so some of the trends we're seeing. Basically, about a month before the election takes place, you see increased attacks against the election sites, and then a few days before. And the most prevalent was in Europe in June, and those were much more mainstream, but we're seeing that across all of the elections. We're kind of waiting for the US later this year. It's nerve-wracking. On a daily basis, so far this year, we've seen 81 billion cyber attacks against an election site.
Wow.
That's about 78 million a day. And so people are trying to do things. Now, the good news is the modern day cybersecurity companies are stopping it, including ours and others. Like we're one of the vendors that help. But it's interesting. It's like the attacks are getting harder, but the technology to stop it are getting better too. And so that's like, I guess that's the good news. But we do see an increased amount of activity. I think so far there hasn't been anything too damaging, so I think that's good, but we should not rest on our laurels. And I think that's up to all of us as kind of an industry to talk about it and to be balanced in how we approach it.
I think with the world becoming more decoupled and less globalized, I think we're going to see more and more attacks in the coming months.
Yes, yeah.
You have an important role to play.
Fragmented world.
Sure.
Yes, yeah, there's just a lot.
Okay, I want to switch us back to company building, and I know some of the folks in the audience want to ask questions, so I'm going to leave some time. So you spoke previously how your role has evolved, and frankly speaking, the fact that you're coming here was to kind of educate the next set of founders. I've said it before, as a VC investor, the best founders that I get to work with are the ones that are able to reinvent themselves every 6 months or so. You clearly have done that many times over. How, can you perhaps tell us how you grew from an early stage founder to the leader you are today? How did you acquire those skills needed to be an executive in a publicly traded company?
Yes, yeah, I have so much to say on this topic. I'll maybe share some, and then if people want to talk more about it, I'm happy to. Or in the future, if you want to ask me, you can send me a note on LinkedIn. I check my messages there. It's so interesting. It's and I know so many founders, and then I know a lot of folks ahead of us. So I've just kind of seen like this longer story arc, which I did not appreciate when we had 5 million in AR. I was a little bit oblivious. I was just like, I was very eager. I was kind of like eager and innocent. I'm just like, I'm here to work every day. It was awesome, but I kind of now see all the stories you read online are true. Let's just put it that way about, venture VCs and founders getting to fight, co-founders getting to fight, boards and founders. We've lived a charmed existence, but now I kind of realize, you look at someone the wrong way and all of a sudden, goes a whole different direction than what's possible. And so, a couple things. So first of all, I think being a founder is a huge privilege, and it is hard to replicate. So if you have something like that you're passionate about and you love, don't take that for granted. The grass is not greener somewhere else. It doesn't mean that's not a hard work, for sure it is, but it is something that it's amazing. And through all the different stages, like today again, I went from I used to think of myself as just a founder. I'd show up and do whatever it took the trash out, did that regularly, all pitched VCs, did all that stuff. And then at some point, I remember I was like, wow, actually I'm a business owner. When we started to have revenue, and I realized actually, the tech is cool, but what's really cool is you have a good business model. And so I became a business owner hat. And all of a sudden I paid more attention to revenue. Before I kind of poo-pooed it and thought it was it wasn't cool to talk about, get a customer win. It was more cool to talk about the tech. Well, turns out you can't compare tech between companies, but you absolutely can compare revenue growth rates. And so it was, the measuring stick was on the revenue, so I kind of went to a business hat, and I remember that happening, 5, 10, 20 million, and you're like, okay, actually this matters. How are we gonna go from 20 to 100? Like, actually, and I need to pay attention to that. And that was, 80 people, and so the types of people, language I use, how I showed up to those people changed. And then around 250, 300 people, I realized, all of a sudden we were recruiting people, and they were coming to work at Cloudflare because of me, or Matthew. And I was like, okay, they don't see me as a Michelle pitching in and helping take out the trash. They were interested in what my point of view was as a leader. And so all of a sudden I became a manager. And again, I had kind of grown up, and I didn't really see myself like that. So then I had to kind of realize, okay, I'm a people manager. How do you give feedback? How can you still have fun but be professional? And I had to work hard at that. And I felt out of place often. I don't know how to handle this situation because I'd never really seen myself in this. I had never seen this situation before. It was kind of in the biggest job of my life in a very senior role. And what I learned along the way is you have to stay in the game. And it was interesting. We started at this point, my point of view is up to 100 million. It's really hard to hire seasoned people to come to your company. I think everything changes at 100 million. You can get a lot more seasoned folks to come work at your company because they can see the path from 100 million to a billion. They can see a path to an IPO or exit with. And so the types of people that were coming in then were people that were more experienced. And I remember a couple people joined and they said, wow, it's so refreshing that you and Matthew still show up for work. And I was like, what are you talking about? What, did your last founders not? They're like, no, they didn't. They were nowhere to be found. And I was like, that's so weird. But I think what happens is, now, in retrospect, there was oftentimes I was in a situation where I was like, I don't know how to handle this, and you don't always get it right the first time, or you don't know what to say, or you don't know what the questions to ask, and you feel a little bit out of place. Well, what's easier is to say, I'm just not gonna show up to the next meeting, or I'm not gonna come to the office. I'm just gonna oh, I'm too busy, or that's not my, I'm gonna go, you're gonna make something up. And obviously, if you stop putting yourself in those situations, then pretty soon you don't know what's happening in the business, and you aren't adding value, and that's a fast way to be exited from your business in that important part of growth. Versus, Matthew and I, we kept showing up, and I kept learning a lot on the job training because I was there. I wanted to, and I worked really hard, and I read all the stuff, and coaches and all that stuff. I learned from people ahead of me. I found a lot of people saying, how did you do this? How did you do that? How do you give feedback here? I didn't like how this showed. Oh, okay, we'll try it this way. I did a lot to get better. But then if you keep getting better, all of a sudden people are like, oh, you're awesome. You're like, oh, I am? Didn't know that. Anyway, thank you. And then when it was interesting, I used to get a lot, wow, I can't believe you're still at Cloudflare. How have you done it? And it's a little bit back to that story I told about that executive coming to the office saying, oh, Cloudflare is a mile wide, an inch deep. I was like, is that a compliment or a slight? And I took it as a slight. It's weird for a founder to be able to scale. Should you just not bring in a professional operator? And it's hard not to weigh on you a little bit. You're like, no one said that overtly, but I go to tons of stuff like this, and people are like, how do you do it? Because it's kind of unbelievable. And you're just like, well, how am I doing it? It sounds unbelievable. But it's actually, there's that book that came out, Super Founders, that that gentleman wrote, I forget. And it's actually, if you look at a lot of the best performing stocks, they are founder-led. So it's kind of like if you can make it past this awkward phase, then some of the best companies that exist were founder-led. And as soon as I had that framework, I was like, I love my job. I'm gonna work really hard to stay on the field every single day and show up as a leader, and I'm gonna be the leader, I'm gonna be the founder, I'm gonna do all these things. And so I kind of grew, and that's a little bit more inside behind the scenes of what happened, but you have to keep showing up for work. And I just have seen so many people stop learning, they stop taking feedback, and I'm just like, that is high risk. You stop taking feedback, wow. That doesn't mean you take feedback from everyone and that the feedback's always right, but you have to be open to it and open to evolving, because otherwise it's really, really risky.
That's awesome. That's one hell of a ride, and being able to learn every single day for 15 years now. It's incredible. I want to thank Michelle for joining us today. Thanks for